I killed Ezekiel for you. I am inside of you. I am you. Which is why when I tell you you want to do this, I am literally telling you that you fucking want to do this. So don't you worry, Billy, my boy. That is home.
Well, it looks like my theory about Joe was true, which leads to Butcher being in the position of being the true villain of this season. Meanwhile, we get a small-scale version of Hero-gasm as Hughie finds out why they say you should never meet your heroes. As it is time for us to break down The Boys Season 4, Episode 6, spoilers ahead. We open this week's episode with Samir being awoken by Butcher and Joe, aka Butcher himself. More on that a little bit later, as Butcher takes this more reasonable approach to having him reset the virus process versus Joe giving him a Walking Dead Glenn option by threatening to bash his head in. As Samir continues to refuse to help and even brings up Vic and his daughter for being his reasons why, as Butcher's symptoms return and he gives Samir a week to get this done. Now, before getting into the meat and potatoes of this week's episode, let's set the table first and talk about this week's side plots. As Daphne, Starlight, and Kimiko join Hughie, who at the request of his dad are dropping off his ashes on the sidewalk outside of the building where the film Made in Manhattan was made while they're on this Made in Manhattan tour. Now, after just getting back in Hughie's life and Hughie just losing his father, we learn that Daphne is moving. I guess I was under the impression that she was going to play a bigger part in Hughie's life, especially after losing his dad and basically replacing the character in that role, but I guess I was wrong. Meanwhile, Kimiko is seen visiting, or at least trying to visit Frenchie twice in this episode, but he refuses to see her. Not much more to offer on these plots, but if you've seen my previous breakdowns, the less that we get of these plots, the better for me because they're extremely disappointing. But I will say, is the Kimiko and the Shining Light plot no longer a thing, or will that have a payoff by this season or next? And on that note, I would say that it's safe to assume that the CIA will most likely bail Frenchie out in order to help them with whatever situation comes before or during the finale. Or they can simply just keep him in prison for all I care. Now, after Cameron's death, Vought News claims that he's taken a leave, as Firecracker is now his replacement and continues to share her ridiculous theories to the masses as she says,
"Are Jewish space lasers brainwashing you into joining their schools?"
Now, putting her craziness aside for a second, later in this breakdown, we'll discuss her master plan of getting Homelander on her side with the help of giving him his favorite drink. We see as trying new ways to calm his mind and lower his anxiety and lower his stress levels, but he can never find the right time to do so in this episode, as he gets a call from A-Train, who's in Toronto because he's fearful of his life after what happened to Cameron, as he knows it's just a matter of time before the 7, and more importantly, Sage calls him out. Now, tells A-Train to calm down. They'll figure this out together as he fills in the boys on Homelander's plan to build a soup army. The boys make the plan to infiltrate Tech Knight's Federalist Society party and gather intel on him, on which Sage shared with him in last week's episode. As the game plan is to have Hughie take on the secret identity of Webweaver, who is actually an alternative Spider-Man in the comics and comes from Earth 71409, and on his Earth he goes by the name of Cooper. Now, Cooper is a former classmate of Peter Parker who was bitten by a radioactive spider after pushing Peter Parker out of the way. Now, this particular character has actually been hinted at throughout this season so far, as he's made appearances on the news headlines on television. He was also a playable character in the Tournament of Heroes game, and also Butcher briefly mentioned him in last week's episode as he gave him money for giving them intel on Firecracker, but now we officially meet him. As we watch giving him the drugs for being a loyal CI, and he is tasked with helping him take it up his pooper. As we see taking another one for the team, and he gets the webbing straight from the source and on his mouth. Now we find out that actually switched his normal drugs with a more stronger drug, which is going to take him out for a few days as Hughie takes his costume. Man, you gotta feel bad for my boy who's always having to literally do the dirty work for the boys, which it actually dawned on me in this moment that this is a tradition for to have something gross happen to him in previous seasons, and it's always in episode 6. Think about season 2, which was titled The Bloody Doors Off. Remember he got almost choked out by that soup's private part? Remember in season 3 with the famous episode Hero-gasm and he was blasted with the sauce? Which makes me wonder, what will next season, episode 6, make him do? Hopefully it'll come full circle and he won't have to do the dirty work. Now, while all that was happening, we have Butcher who's talking to himself as Becca as she tells him that he's losing focus of saving Ryan. At this point, Butcher feels like he's mainly focused on just saving the world, or at least he thinks so, and he tells Becca, or aka himself, that he can't do both, save the world and save Ryan, as Becca says,
"You're gonna kill one Homelander, just end up with another."
Now we follow that conversation up with Joe sharing a story with Butcher about coming back home from war and him not feeling like he's in a normal world, and he knows that he was meant to make his enemies scream. As he says,
Now tell me, Billy, who's the real you?
which is all setting up Butcher choosing between the good and the bad. But going back to that story, I am curious after what we find out at the end of this episode. I wonder if he's coming up with these stories based on his actual experience as Butcher, or was that an actual story from Joe that he told him years ago? With that out of the way, time to get into the main story of this episode, which takes us to Tech Knight's house and also his sex cave. Now this was a small detail, but you'll notice the icicle and the snow outside on the ground, which to me means that it's wintertime, which probably will set up a Christmas episode for next week's episode. And as far as the finale goes, we'll probably see the first official day that Singer's in office. Now inside, everyone cheers for Homelander as he's joined by Ryan and the more popular members of the Seven right now, which is Sage, A-Train, and Firecracker, which means they left Noir and Deep back at Vought, which we'll talk about here in a second. Meanwhile, we see Homelander gets to working the room as Knight comes up to him, kissing his ass, talking about a future team up between the two. And Homelander reminds him that they're not on the even playing field and that he needs his resources from now, but they're never going to be equals. Speaking of equals, we see Ashley walks in as Sage reminds her that she's the idiot child and not welcome, only to find out that her and Knight go way back and she got invited to go to a secret party, which is completely different from this one. Now within these conversations, we learn how Knight and his family got their money from being slave catchers and owning most of the private prisons in the US. As Knight makes his racist remarks towards A-Train about being able to catch him during slavery, you can also take his remark as him pointing out the fact that Sage might have told him that A-Train's the actual leak, as he says to A-Train that they would have caught him. Which, by the way, this scene here and meeting Knight's butler a little bit later makes what happens to him in this episode at the end feel so much better. Now out back, we see the boys poking fun of Hughie, who's wearing the web slinger's outfit, as we find out that he was exclusively invited by Knight himself, as Hughie is tasked with bugging his house and taking Knight as well. As Hughie makes his way in, he sees that the Seven is in attendance as well as Vic. We see Knight is extremely happy that Webb is in attendance, and we learn that his excitement comes from this being an interview process for Webb becoming his next sidekick, but first things have to go well as he takes him to see his tech cave. Now we see that this Tech Knight cave is basically a sex dungeon, as we learn that Knight's butler Elijah raised him since he was a kid after losing his parents. Now the show is definitely leaning into the idea that Tech Knight is compared to Batman in both Iron Man. He's rich, but he's also lost his parents, and he has a butler who's basically raising him as his own. But to further the conversations about him being compared to Batman, we meet his sidekick who's actually chained up in this sex dungeon. Now, while we never get to see the identity of Tech Knight's sidekick because he was in the mask this whole episode, in the comics, Tech Knight's sidekick went by the name of Ladio before becoming his own hero and went by the name of Swingwing. Now, I don't know if we'll see more of this character moving forward, especially after what happens at the end, but I would love to know who was under that mask. Meanwhile, Homelander and Sage fill Vic in about their planned sidebar with the One Percenters and sharing their plans with them to commit treason. As Vic also learns that Homelander is well aware of Stan Breakout and she plays coy about knowing. Right now it's hard to tell which side Vic is on, which to me easily makes her one of the most important and interesting characters of the show so far this season. And I really wish we would have swapped out all the Frenchie and Kimiko scenes and broke Stan out earlier this season and focused more on them and Vic's storyline, because like I said, I find her story and his story to be way more compelling than the others. Back at Vought, we see Noir is ready to quit his Black Ninja act, and we also find out he can fly in this episode, which I think will come up later this season, as Deep gives him a pep talk about why he should stay. Deep tells him about how him and old Noir were really good bros and how Noir got really excited whenever he killed someone. As this seemed to get to Noir and gave him some motivation that he needed to stay in character, which to me will most likely point towards a scene that was in the official trailer for this new season where Noir faces off against Butcher. And I would bet that that happens in the next episode. Back with the boys, Annie is afraid of what's happening to Hughie as he's not checking back in with them. They decide to go in and see if he needs saving. They take their weapons with them as well. We watch as Kimiko climbs up the wall and she lets Annie and MM in and they decide to split up. Now Kimiko dropping her phone can end up being nothing, or it's the show showing us that she just lost her main way of communicating with others because she would use her phone to type out her thoughts. But this can also be a plot to show us that she may have lost her phone and someone's going to find it, maybe like Sage or someone working within the Seven, and they're going to find important information on her phone and use it against the boys. So let me know in the comments, do you all think the phone's going to have some important information that will be used against the boys, or will it just end up being nothing? Now back at the party, after having abortion explained to her, we see Vic and Sage have a brief chat that seems to align them on the same team. As Sage shares with Vic a childhood story about how she wasn't listened to when it came to saving her grandmother from cancer after coming up with a cure. To me, this was Sage telling Vic that was the reason in the moment of her life to make her live her life, not fully using her mind to save humans' lives around the world. As Sage invites Vic to join her after telling her this story and tells her, now I could be wrong, but to me this scene kind of showed Sage as planning outside of Homelander's main plan. To me this is her making her own secret little team, and if things go bad, this is her grander plan, to have the Deep, now Vic, and maybe A-Train join her to eventually take out Homelander. See Firecracker getting told to sit at the kids' table by Sage when she tries to get into the adult conversation, which was another example of Sage versus Firecracker beef that comes up a little bit later in this episode. Sticking with Firecracker, we see her run into Annie, who pretends to apologize to her, but ultimately knocks her out with one of the items from MM's soup weapons case. Just curious to know you guys' thoughts in the comments below. Before Annie knocked her out, do you think that Annie really meant what she was saying when she was apologizing, or was it all a ruse? We see MM and Kimiko find Sage while looking for Knight's secret entrance. Now Sage taunts MM by mentioning his daughter, who she's been keeping tabs on. He also talks about how his daughter has the same issues that he's going through with his anger and his ADHD, which pretty much sets MM back to square one after taking his meditation sessions, as he ultimately shoots her in the head. Now that action causes him to have a panic attack as he passes out. Now for those wondering how did Sage survive getting shot in the head, remember that one of her superpowers is that if her head, more importantly her brain, is damaged, it can just regenerate. We see Kimiko finds A-Train at the party and convinces him to take MM to the hospital, which he does. After dropping off MM at the hospital, we see a child smiling at him after seeing him be a hero, and we see A-Train smiles back at him. Yeah, that smile right there from A-Train is the death mark in my opinion. It is really safe to assume that he will make the switch to the boys by the season end, and we'll probably see him die as a hero, at least in the eyes of the show. Let's take a detour to see the freaky ass 69 guy Tech Knight choking himself while watching Webb sit on a cake, ass out, and making him fart on the cake as Ashley arrives and things are just getting started. See Ashley dressed up in all black and saying the most ridiculous Army Hammer things as she tickles Hughie's feet while whipping him. Now while this might not be as explicit as Herogasm episode, this was pretty wild to see nonetheless. Now Knight eventually figures out that it's Hughie under the mask and takes out his tools in preparation to torture him and create a new hole that he can fill. Now before doing so, Annie and Kimiko save Hughie and they tie up Tech Knight. The torturing method doesn't work on Knight, but his sidekick helps them by giving them his computer as they start to donate to charities, but it's not until they mention Black Lives Matter and we see him reveal the plan that Sage told him in last week's episode. We learn that Homelander's plan is to use the prisons to hold those in who stand against him, aka
he's talking about internment camps.
Which is crazy because that's exactly what Joe, aka Butcher, said back in episode 1. As Elijah takes this opportunity to choke out Knight and says that he's going to make it seem like it was an accident as he's killing him, which is a huge payback for all of the years of damage, as he says,
Zendaya. The safe word was Zendaya.
Now it's time for Homelander's big speech to convince the bigwigs to join his mission, but unfortunately his mouthpiece isn't available as he sees that Sage won't be able to speak for him. Now Homelander tries to pull off a Thanos and do it himself, but he gives a very unconvincing speech, as Vic steps in and saves him by giving them the actual speech and convinces them to join. Now I'll be honest, I get that this was Vic's big moment to the show to show us that she's taken the particular side and she's also taken the advice that was given to her by Sage earlier, but my issue is that it came at the expense of making Homelander look bad. By no means am I team Homelander, but I do admit he's the greatest villain on television right now, but from a narrative perspective, I really hated how the character was handled in this episode, starting with him not being able to use his powers to see or hear or notice that the boys were in the literal same building as him, then them embarrassing him like this, and then what happens with him later in the episode with the breast milk. To me, I just thought that episode 4 established that he wasn't going to be listening to humans anymore and making them do whatever he wants and not going back on his weaknesses. Like, why didn't he just laser one of those people in the room and just use them as an example for not listening to him? It's a mystery to me, but again, I just wasn't a fan of how the show made him look like he was 10 toes down on fully developing his darker version of himself, and then this episode taking him back to not doing that. I really hope I'm wrong and things will change next week or in the finale. Let me know how you all felt that Homelander was handled in this episode. Now we end this episode with learning that he had a panic attack and that he's told that he's going to have to stop whatever he's doing to prevent something worse from happening, which to me is setting up the plot that he's going to be forced to leave the boys. Now will that happen this season or next season, or will he die before that even happens? Now Firecracker finally reveals her plan as she goes to Homelander and tells him about Annie being at the party and ties that to the boys being a part of Knight's death, as he realizes that the leak is still present and it wasn't Cameron. Now Firecracker takes his opportunity to also put a lot of this on stage and tell Homelander that she's not really doing her job. She also says how loyal she is to him after he saved her and made her someone important, as she tells him that she's been taking pills to help her lactate as she shares her milk with him, making her the new Madeline. Which, by the way, Homelander's obsession with breast milk isn't public knowledge, which makes me wonder, how does she know that? Then makes me wonder, does she have some inside information from someone that actually might be a secret mole? As our last scene reveals something that I mentioned in my last video would happen, as the true identity of Joe is revealed. As Samir tells the truth about the virus and why he will not continue to recreate it, because in order to make it strong enough to kill Homelander, it will be unstable and become airborne and highly contagious and practically kill all the Supes, including Ryan. Now Butcher is left with his decision to force Samir to continue as Becca tries to talk him out of that option until Joe tells her to shut up, revealing that he's been Butcher this whole time. As we learn that Joe died years ago and Butcher never saved him, which is something I mentioned in my last breakdown, as Joe basically was the tumor that killed Ezekiel in last week's episode, as we see Joe tells Butcher,
"That is home."
Now, I don't know if Butcher's going to go down the path of trying to take Vic or even Zoe and holding them hostage to make Samir do what he wants him to. Maybe that's how Frenchie gets back into the story. Like, we're going to see Butcher breaking him out of jail. Or maybe we're going to see Butcher convincing the CIA or the president to go down this route to getting the best scientists to recreate the virus, leaving the boys trying to stop Butcher from doing so, and Joe coming out, and we're going to see Joe/Butcher going against the boys. Look, I thought overall this episode was better than last week, as we get this mini Herogasm 2.0 moments, which were wild, and also shout out to Elijah for getting his get back. But again, I just thought this episode was okay. Yes, last week and this week had some funny, wild, crazy moments, and they're all cool, and we know that's what the boys like to do. But for me, I enjoy the boys when the writing is good and the characters have motivations and they're not going back and forth between reused plots, and I like when the stakes feel real. Like, when was the last time the boys were actually in danger? Like, in this episode, they find out that Homelander was at the same party and they barely blinked an eye, went along with their mission. Like, again, the stakes haven't been there for me in this season. To me, last week's episode and this week's episode just could have been combined into one episode because they were basically setup episodes. And it felt like the characters were just kind of put on hold before the final two episodes, which I do believe next week we'll see Noir in action, like I had mentioned earlier, from based on the trailer and based on the conversation he had with Deep. I think may take the advice from the doctor and leave the boys on Christmas. Meanwhile, Homelander will have Firecracker by his side and might toss Sage, leaving her to using her secret group to take things back over, and that may or may not include A-Train. Which, speaking of A-Train, I can see him officially joining the boys, or at least doing something that shows which side he's on, which again I think will lead to him becoming a hero but also dying, and that playing into the arc of this character having a redemption story. Which also, this episode didn't really show which side Ryan is on, which makes me think that they're going to probably show that before the finale, if he's Team Homelander or if he's Team Becca, which means that he won't join his dad. And we'll also most likely see Stan and Vic in action and really see which side she really lies on. That's going to be the end of this week's breakdown. I appreciate you all watching. Make sure to leave your thoughts on this episode in the comments below. Favorite moments, least favorite moments, deeper meanings, Easter eggs, and more importantly, share your theories and predictions of what you all hope to see in the weeks ahead. Make sure to check out my playlist of all of my boys coverage, including my reactions to some of these episodes. You all are awesome. Stay safe, and I'll catch you all on the next video.
Yeah.